just as a artist would have a palette and a brush, you're going to have a palette and a brush. And what you're able to do within Open Brush depends upon what tools you have available to you in your palette. And that set of tools is constantly changing. Open Brush was originally software called Tilt Brush, and that software was created, actually, is purchased by Google and is made available about the same time when the HTC Vive and some of those other early consumer grade VR systems were made. It was one of the tools that Google made available for whoever to use for free. And then when Google abandoned the project, they made it open source, and the people at OpenBrush, and when there were some other groups too, they took that code and they started turning it into what's really become a very functional set of tools for creating virtual reality scenes, art, call it, and then in the advanced modes for recording that, exporting it, doing all of the things. We'll get into that later. So your tools are your brush, where you do the strokes, and affect those strokes. So on the underneath your thumb, whether it's a thumb pad or a joystick or whatever, it's going to depend upon your controllers. Um, you've got the ability to make the stroke large or narrower. So that's the same stroke, just with different settings. And you can see that there's a circle there that adjusts the width of what you're going to be doing. And that width is actually going to vary depending upon what level of zoom you have and the things that you have in place. So I'm going to clean most of those out of the way. And you'll notice that this little scale keeps coming up. This is an important tool to learn at the very beginning. The way that you access it is between your two control. You'll press on the inside, so your hand sort of wraps around this so that your thumb is on the top, your trigger finger is in the front, and then these inside areas, so you would press those with the fingers that are not on your trigger finger, and if you press both of those, that allows you to change the scale. So if we're looking at just that one stroke, if we're at the default scale, the human scale, which I call 1:1 or human scale, that particular stroke is that size. Well, when you change the scale, so I've gone to the squirrel scale, so that if I was a squirrel, that same stroke would seem that size to me. So you've got the squirrel stroke, which is the smallest scale to be viewing from. You've got the dog scale, you've got the human scale, which I call 1:1. You've got the elephant scale, and then you've got the dinosaur. And so that same stroke hasn't changed, just the way that you're perceiving it changes. But as you change that scale, it also changes the way that you interact. So if I'm at the dinosaur scale and I make the largest, so I adjust my brush so that it's the largest diameter, and I do an S, and then I do it at the smallest scale, and then I adjust my scale back to 1:1. Remember, this first one is our human scale. So these three strokes were drawn at the same scale, or this one and this one were drawn the same size in real world. And so what you've got there is a difference in the way that the strokes look. But as you keep on going to the smaller version, when I do the largest stroke, it's there. When I do the smallest width stroke, and that may be hard to see, I'm going to go back to the squirrel scale, and I'm going to do the largest brush stroke. And I'm doing this the same size, the same size with my hand. So that's the mouse stroke. That's the human stroke right there. And then that is the dinosaur stroke. And these are all basically the same size strokes. But what that does is that gives you the ability, by changing the scale that you're working at, that gives you the ability to really affect the way that you're doing things so that you can do a stroke that's huge or a stroke that's tiny. So when I'm doing detail work, I'll come in and I'll work at the squirrel level. So if I'm wanting to draw eyebrows in on a on a model or something like that, I'll work at that scale. Whereas if I am trying to create mountains or scenery or buildings or something like that, then I'll switch to this other scale, the dinosaur scale. And it's just a way of being efficient. It's also efficient at moving around. So one of the things you're going to do is you're going to move around a lot in virtual reality. You'll have something way across the room that you're going to want to interact with. Well, it's easier to move those. So this is one arm. So I'm going from my arms fully outstretched to fully in. And so that's how far it goes away when I'm at the dinosaur scale. I'll put it at the full length. I'll go to the human scale and I will grab again and I'll come in and I'll go out. And I don't know how well you can see that. I'll change it a little bit, location. It doesn't come in nearly as far. And if I go down to the squirrel size and reach my arms out all the way and pull in, you can hardly see the movement. So it becomes a good tool for allowing you to manipulate the environment, to understand what size, how this scale tool works. And that really makes it easier for you to manipulate the work. And that becomes second nature as you go through this. Okay. So that's your brush tool. Now let's focus on the palette. And you've seen me go into the palette a little bit. Let's start with the bottom part of the palette. So this is, we've already been working with the controller that is by default in the right hand, the brush. On the other hand is our Tools palette. So on this controller, there's a series of different tools that you can use to work with. And the way that you flip between them, this is a three-sided grid. And so I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate using my thumb. I rotate between the palettes and I come to the one that has these tools, and this is the eraser. So I'm going to erase some of this, get it off my screen so that it's not distracting to us. So here's the first palette, and this is palettes that are not directly related to the brush strokes. I say that, and then the next one's a straight edge. So the eraser is there. That allows you to erase something. You can redo or undo. So you can put it back on there. The undo and redo are also available depending upon your controllers as part of this controller. So you've got undo and redo, and you'll notice that depending upon the context, those change. So the thumb allows you to rotate between the palettes on this try toolbar. And yeah, so within those, we've already looked at the eraser, a straight edge, whereas here I was able to draw an S. If I try to do the same thing when I've got the straight edge on, you'll notice that wherever I started to wherever I end is the location that goes to. It's not letting me do the curved action. So that's a straight edge tool. The environment tool allows you to manipulate the environment around that you're working within. So off in the background there, you'll see that there are like sort of hills in the background, some fog. You've got the ability to change that. I now normally work in pass through. Pass through doesn't have anything in the background. It appears black, but it's not actually black back there. It's just lacking of light. And if you're creating art that is going to be used in augmented reality, then the pass through doesn't put that extraneous information. It only provides the strokes that you do so that you can view your strokes with just your strokes when you move them to an augmented reality. So that's the one that I go to first. Standard is the one we started with. Night sky, if you look, you can see, um, you know, constellations up there. Space, same sort of thing. There's a dress form that allows you, and you notice I grabbed and turned the environment in order to get there. So we were over here. I wanted to be over here. I grabbed and I turned it. So this is how you manipulate the entire world, is by grabbing those two. And so you're going to want to get proficient at that. So going back to the environment, there's the dress form, a pedestal. So these become things that you can use to as a frame of reference, or a background tool to use while you're in there. And there's the snowman. And most people, when they see the snowman, come in and they do something with the snowman. There's the snowman, and then there's just different color combinations that really become what is your preference. So here, black, there's actually a black background. So this wouldn't work with the augmented reality. It would bring the black up there with it. The white would have the white. So those are the ones that I use. And then the pass through is the one that I most often use when I'm designing, and then I add other backgrounds if I decide to use them as I'm going through. Those are design decisions. Okay, so that's the environment tool. I'm going to turn off the eraser, and that's how you do this. You turn it on with a click, you turn it off with a click. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the cameras. So by default, there's a series of cameras that are accessible to you. By default, it's going to come up with a snapshot, and that'll do exactly what you expect. You take a snapshot, and that is saved to your My Documents folder under Open Brush, and then within the folder called Snapshot or Images. And so there's the snapshot. With the thumb, you can go to an auto GIF, 5-second GIF, or video. And it can include audio. If you've got audio playing in the background, you can include that with the video. And what this does is it allows you the ability to come in and record handheld video. That is the first tool for video that you'll experience, the handheld version of that. And so those are under the cameras tool. The teleport tool, if we were in a big scene, right now I don't have one, but if I'm working away and there's something way over there that I want to get to, and my space that I'm able to work in won't let me walk that far, I can use this to bring me closer. So that's a teleport tool. It's a rough way of moving distance within your scene, and it only has one function. There's a mirror tool, and what the mirror tool does is it allows you to create strokes that are almost identical on opposite sides of this mirror. So you'll notice that my tool is right here, but there's a second area. Well, if I take and draw something with that, I only had to draw one line, but it drew a mirror image of that. And that's a real useful tool if you're trying to do something that's symmetrical. You can turn that mirror off, turn it back on, and The other thing that you need to know about when you're working with the mirror is that the strokes on opposite sides of the mirror are each individual stroke. So if I come in here and click on that side, the other side is left there. So they're individual strokes, even though they're created at the same time with the mirror. There are other advanced things with the mirror. We'll get into those later. I'm going to use the undo right now, get rid of that. The undo and redo, you have the ability to do that either on your palette or, as I mentioned, just with your thumb on the palette controller. Okay, so those are the tools that we have to use. And now let's take a look. So we've got the second of the palettes that are on, or the tool menus that are available on this palette by default in the beginner's mode is the color palette. And so that allows me to pick the colors that I'm going to want to use. And it's extremely flexible. There's different types of tools for deciding how to pick your colors. If you're familiar with color theory, you could probably better understand the purposes of each of those than I could explain it to you, but it becomes really simple to begin to add colors to your palette. And one of the cool tools that has been added is the ability to add a color to sort of a memory of a color, so that you've got the chance to re-access that same thing. And that's what this plus is for. So you get a color that you're going to want to use, and then you click the plus, and then you can come back in and access that anytime. So you can have a number of different colors that are in there. And this is actually not the greatest brush stroke for demonstrating colors, but I'll get into brush strokes in a minute. But you can add the palette colors there. So we've got green, red, and well, you naturally are going to have to go to a blue to counter that. And so what we'll do is we'll add the blue by clicking on that. We now have access to all of those colors. And as I said, there's just a lot of different ways of getting access to the colors with these different functional tools that are part of it. We'll cover the jitter in another video. That's sort of an advanced tool. It's not necessarily related to the color palette. It just happens to be on there. So I'm going to change my tool palette again by using the thumb pad. I'm going to switch to the third one, and that gives me my brushes. So I'm going to clean out most of these strokes that I've been doing. I'm going to go back to my original stroke so that there's not all that noise on there. And then I'm going to my palette, my brush palette. And so what you'll see, these little arrows here show you when there's additional tools in the background. And so you can switch between there. There's quite a few tools in here. So oil paint, there's that stroke. And again, don't forget that you can change the size of these and it makes a difference. So you've got the larger, you've got the smaller, or let's move it over here, smaller, so that you can see it. And that depends upon what stroke you're using. So if I was doing fire, that's a green fire. If I wanted to do duct tape, there's my duct tape. There's the wide duct tape. Same strokes, just different width. So those are the things that the only way to really learn it is by spending time in here and doing it. And you'll learn that there's a lot of different things that you can do, a lot of different, this is how you get to your art, or get to the point where you're making your art. And so check out all the brushes. There's just a ton of things that you can do with these. As it advances, they're creating more brushes. There's experimental brushes that you won't have access to yet, but you'll learn how to do that if you follow this series. And the other thing is that there are audio responsive brushes. So certain brushes are going to respond to the sound that you have in the background, whether it's a voice or whether it's music or whatever you have playing. So if you have music in the background, you can click on this and it's going to look for that audio. Because I don't have any audio playing in the background right now, it's not going to let me do that. So I'll show you how to do that in another video. But if you're playing music, click that, see what it does. There, it'll put a little icon next to certain of these brush strokes that will indicate which ones are responsive and which ones aren't. And then that gives you a whole nother way of experimenting. So we've covered the basic tools. We've covered the color palette and how to use it. Um, if I want to go back and use a color again, I showed you how to put it here. You simply click on that, it resets it, and now you've got that access to that color again. So that's a useful tool for keeping it in. What I used to have to do is use an advanced tool called a picker, and we won't go into all that, but it's an improvement, and it's nice that it's out there. So those are all three top beginners level. Down here, you've got your save sketch. This is no longer a thing that is available to us. Settings in here. So, for instance, if you want to swap hands, you would come in here, and then there's just different tools that you'll interact with at different times in here, but they're not all there at this point in time. So you'll notice there's just one page of stuff, tools that are available here. But another thing down in this toolbox is the advanced mode. So you can click on advanced mode, and that is going to give you access to additional palettes of tools. And down here in the more options, you'll see that it gives you more access. So those were the ones that you could see before, but you can also go into labs, and labs is where, for instance, I'm using a spectator camera right now. I turned that on earlier before as the video was beginning so that you could see from this camera. That's not accessible from the beginner menu. We'll go into that in another video. So I'm going to go in and I'm just going to put that one away. Going back to beginner mode, what we will do is, so it's time to save our sketch. So when you're ready to save your sketch, and I encourage you to save pretty regularly, there's two things you can do. When it's a brand new sketch, the only option is to save the sketch. And what you do is just a camera comes up on your brush hand, you use that, you click, that saves the sketch and it makes it available in this sketchbook. So the last sketch here is the last one you recorded, and that's how you would load that sketch if you wanted to come into it and re-access that sketch again later. The other tool that is here is the clear sketch. So if I click on clear sketch, it's going to ask me, are you sure? And if I click yes, it gets rid of all the strokes. And in essence, if that is no longer tied to the previous sketch, it's now just a blank sketch. And before you can save it, this is not accessible right now. Before you can save it, you have got to go in and make strokes. Then when you click that save sketch, because it's never been existed before, you can only save it in that way. But if you make changes and you want to save it, there's the option to overwrite the last sketch or to create a new one. In this case, we'll just overwrite it. And again, that becomes available in our sketch pad. That's enough for today. What I would recommend you do is go in and start spending some time in this. There's a lot of things to learn, and it takes time spent in here doing it, just like anything else. The better you're going to get is going to be based upon how much time you spend in doing it and get familiar with the tools and what you can do with it. And it's actually a whole lot of fun. I've been doing it for many hours now. So that's enough for now. This will give you a start on how to start creating sketches, and have fun and watch the next video, and we'll carry on from there. So I'm going to save my sketch because it's always good to save before you leave. And then I'm going to leave